Let's talk to Nicole Lampert now. She's a journalist and covers a number of issues. And just before we do, I actually just want to remind ourselves about what Sir Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, said in his Eid message. Eid is, of course, the festival at the end of Ramadan, and he sent out a message that's been highly criticised by many people, including the Israeli embassy here in the United Kingdom. And I just want to remind ourselves what Sir Sadiq has been saying.
Assalamu alaikum and Eid Mubarak. As the Mayor of London, I want to send my warmest wishes to everyone celebrating Eid here in London and around the world. Of course, this year, for many, the usual happiness we feel during Eid will be tempered by the appalling suffering and killing that continues in Sudan and Palestine. More than 50,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza as a result of Israel's ongoing military campaign, including more than 15,000 children. These betrayals of humanity should weigh heavily on our collective conscience. But I'm proud that while the international community has chosen to avert its gaze, Londoners have not.
Not so sure about that one. Israel has, the Israeli embassy has said, firstly, we'd like to emphasise to Mr. Khan, the war is a result of the brutal and horrific attack by Hamas, a prescribed terror organisation in the UK, which was imposed on Israel on the 7th of October 2023. It is alarming that throughout the message there is no mention of Hamas or any condemnation of terrorism, and a call for the release of 59 hostages that are being held in horrific and inhumane conditions. Well, a spokesman for the Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, insisted he had strongly condemned the actions of Hamas, saying the Mayor has repeatedly conveyed his outrage at attacks by Hamas on Israel and has strongly condemned these acts of terrorism. He is deeply saddened by the loss of all lives and continues to support calls for a permanent ceasefire. Nicole Lampert is a journalist who follows these issues. Nicole, what do you make of this?
I, as a Jewish Londoner, am quite worried by this. It feels to me like he's trying to rile up anger. He's not only repeating Hamas talking points, but he's going worse than that. He said that 50,000 people had been killed as a result of Israel's military campaign. All that the Hamas figures show, and even they are disputed figures, is that 50,000 people have died over the last 18 months. And that includes natural deaths, that includes stillborn babies. So he's gone further than that.
They've also been revised down, haven't they? I mean, Hamas have actually revised down those figures as well. And I mean, you as a journalist and I as a journalist wouldn't trust Wikipedia if it said that. So why are we trusting why is Sadiq Khan trusting his terrorist organisation?
Because it feels like he's determined to rile up community anger. And then the other thing that upset me is this kind of dehumanising language by saying that it was a betrayal of humanity. And I've been interviewing this week Simon Sharman, who talked about, he's done a show about Auschwitz and talked about this thousands of years of dehumanising language towards Jews. And this feels like the latest iteration of that in terms of saying that somehow this is outside of humanity and therefore it's right to hurt Jews. That's how I would see it, and that's why I would say it's particularly dangerous. And then he talks about Londoners and how they're on the right side, but presumably he's not talking about Londoners like me. So he's deliberately dividing Londoners up into the good Londoners and the bad Londoners.
He said while the international community has chosen to avert its gaze, I'm not sure that is true at all, Londoners have not. And they're not just gazing on the Middle East, they're not just, they're coming out every couple of weeks and having mass protests, some of which are incredibly anti-Semitic in terms of what people are saying, signs they're holding, things they're chanting about from the river to the sea, for example, which is an anti-Semitic phrase. There's no nuance here in that, is there? Or maybe there is nuance, but it's a nuance in one direction.
I don't really know what he means by Londoners, but if he means the marchers, then there's not very many of them anymore. There were at the most around 300,000, but now that is smaller. People can see that it's a war, not a genocide, despite what people like to call it. It's just a horrific war, and people saw that there were ceasefire deals, and in those ceasefire deals, hostages were returned, the fighting stopped, and that Hamas could stop this war tomorrow by simply giving up, which it should do. It needs to give up its arms, and there's fights going on within Gaza, local people who are demonstrating against Hamas and saying we've had enough of this. I'm not surprised. It's a horrific, brutal war, as all wars are. And they are also calling that the hostages should be returned. as most of us are. So there's fighting going on within that world, within Gaza, but there's no nuance to that. All he sees is bad versus good.
And very few people of what I would call the usual suspects who tweet and say a lot of things in the public domain about what's going on in the Middle East, who are incredibly silent when it comes to Gazans themselves rising up against Hamas and the torture and murder of those people, and we don't see nearly enough about it in the media. Just tell us some of the detail about that. I know you follow these things very, very closely, Nicole, and there may be, our viewers and listeners may not be entirely familiar with what's going on there. Just expand on that point. There are people within Gaza who are rising up against Hamas, and they're being brutally quelled.
Yeah, so last week there were about 4 days of demonstrations. It's hard to know exactly how many people were doing it. It's between hundreds and thousands of men, mainly calling for the end of Hamas, calling them terrorists, saying to return the hostages. Occasionally they're saying that, but also just saying we're sick of this war. We don't want any more death. The result, and I spoke to two of the people on some of the days that they were demonstrating, and they reiterated that they are against Hamas and they are against this war. They've had enough of it and they want to leave the country because it's so miserable there. And they don't really want Hamas's rivals Fatah either, because they see them as equally as corrupt and dangerous. What they want is peace, and that's understandable, because I think that's what most people in the world would want, peace, but that is not what Hamas wants. It's not in their charter. So by the weekend, around 6 of the main organisers of these demonstrations were brutally murdered. There's one in particular, and he was videoed being tortured, and then his body was put on the steps of his family home. This situation is ongoing in terms of the demonstrations have been quelled, but even today there's images coming out of Gaza, and it looks like some of the family members of some of these demonstrators are fighting Hamas militants inside of Gaza. So it may be that the demonstrations will continue. It's hard to know. Hamas is a fascist organisation, which, as we can see, is incredibly brutal even to people within Gaza. And it should just be said that those 6 people, for example, who will be killed, their numbers will be attributed to Israel's killing them. That's how it works. Everybody that dies in Gaza is attributed to Israel.
Yeah, and you can't. And neither of us is saying, of course, Nicole, that lots of people haven't died in Gaza. That, of course, has happened. But the question is, how many of those are through natural causes? How many of those are terrorists as well? And how many of those are innocent civilians? We just don't know. Back here in the UK, just a final question for you, Nicole. I wonder how you assess this, because we have Sadiq Khan saying what he has said today, and I reiterate that his spokesman says the mayor has repeatedly conveyed his outrage at attacks by Hamas in Israel and has strongly condemned these acts of terrorism. He is deeply saddened by the loss of all lives and continues to support calls for a permanent ceasefire. But the question I want to ask you is that we've got the anniversary today, 5 years of Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party. Has he rooted out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? We know Jeremy Corbyn, who I firmly believe is an anti-Semite, and he is welcome to sue me if he wants to. He is out of the Labour Party, but there are still clearly there are at least questions over senior figures and their attitude to both Jewish people and to Israel, not least from our viewers and listeners. Paul says, how can London's Jewish community now believe they're supported by their mayor?
Yeah, well, I don't feel supported by him at all, and it's interesting that Keir Starmer hasn't said anything about this round, Sadiq Khan. He's the only person that's more senior in some ways to Sadiq Khan, because it's kind of like, I have Jewish friends saying to me, what can we do about this? And there's nothing we can do. He is meant to be our mayor, but he's certainly not speaking for us, and it feels like he's speaking against us. The only person that can kind of bring him into line is Keir Starmer, who's been silent over this. In terms of the broader issue of has anti-Semitism been quelled, no, there are still senior figures within Labour who are problematic, and Labour itself has a problem in terms of there are quite a few constituencies that we know of where Muslim people, and I'm certainly not saying all Muslim people are on the other side of this war or anything like that, but where there's a kind of block and they feel under pressure by that bloc. And of course, if we remember, we go back to the election, then people who were deemed not to be speaking up for Gaza enough had people going up against them, and even Jess Phillips, who's very pro-Gaza, some of her people had their tyres slashed and things like that, because this became such a problematic issue in the run-up to the election, and that's not been addressed at all, really.
Nicole, thank you. Nicole is a journalist in London. Thank you for that, Nicole Lampert there.